kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house.
Our grandfather took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized him.
I know that flashlight, but that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
He never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen, The middle brother, Matteo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger two. Another said Matteo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Matteo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Matteo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed. Bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Matteo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Matteo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the 3rd night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all 3 boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, She turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Matteo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Matteo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her, too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Matteo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter, because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors, who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the three boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small, because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon, carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself. Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, The kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out.
Stay down. People like you do not get to explain first.
Most people had already decided what he was.
We already know enough.
To the store security guard, he was an easy target. To the assistant manager, he was the perfect excuse.
I knew something was wrong.
And to the shoppers passing by with their carts and baskets, he was just an uncomfortable scene they could pretend not to see.
This does not feel right.
You should have checked the cameras first.
He noticed the manager watching too carefully.
The truth is still here.
And the young cashier looking terrified because she remembered the truth.
He paid. I saw him pay.
That camera was not supposed to see that.
My version is the one they will believe.
They thought the story would end with a quiet man being blamed, embarrassed, and erased.
No receipt, no proof.
But the man on that floor had spent years protecting records from people who thought power gave them the right to rewrite reality. And before the grocery store ever learned, it had chosen the wrong man to destroy. That morning had begun in the kind of darkness most people never noticed. Not the frightening kind, not the kind that filled headlines, but the slow blue darkness before sunrise, when working people moved through the world while everyone else was still asleep. Marcus had finished mopping the 4th floor hallway of the Bryan County Courthouse just after 5 in the morning. The courthouse was empty then, except for the hum of vending machines, the distant click of old pipes, and the soft squeak of his shoes against the marble floors. At 52, Marcus Hale had learned how to move through important buildings without being seen. He knew which doors stuck in winter, which judges arrived before sunrise, which clerks left coffee rings on polished desks, and which hallways held conversations people assumed no janitor would understand. He wore a faded charcoal hoodie over his maintenance shirt, dark work pants worn thin at the knees, and black shoes that had been repaired more times than replaced. To most people who passed him during the day, he was simply part of the building's background, like a trash bin, a mop bucket, or a light that flickered near the elevators. But Marcus had not always been invisible. Years earlier, before the courthouse had reduced him to a man with a mop, he had worked in the records division, the quiet room where evidence logs, video files, sealed documents, and time-stamped materials were handled with more care than most people ever imagined. Marcus had not been a lawyer, a judge, or a man with a title people respected in public, but he had been trusted with something more fragile than reputation. He had been trusted with the record, and to Marcus, the record was sacred. He believed a time stamp mattered. He believed a receipt mattered. He believed a camera angle, a signature, a missing minute on a file, or a note written in the margin could become the only thing standing between a person and a lie that looked official. He had seen what happened when powerful people treated paperwork like clay, shaping it until the truth became convenient. He had seen ordinary people lose jobs, children, homes, and names because someone with a cleaner suit and a louder voice wrote the first version of the story. That was why Marcus had lost his position. It had happened 7 years earlier, in a case that almost no one remembered now. A young man had claimed he had been mistreated during a detention incident, and the entire dispute came down to a hallway camera file and the time written in the evidence log. The file showed one thing. The amended report suggested another. A superior had asked Marcus to correct what they called a harmless clerical error. The tone had been casual, almost friendly, as if changing a number by 14 minutes was the same as fixing a typo. Marcus had refused. He had not shouted. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply said that the time on the file was the time on the file, and that his initials would not sit beside a lie. In a place like Bryan County, that kind of refusal did not always create a scandal. Sometimes it created something quieter and more efficient. His performance reviews changed. His attitude was questioned. His ability to work well with others became a concern. Within months, the man trusted to protect records was reassigned to building maintenance, and the courthouse learned to speak of him as difficult without ever explaining what he had been difficult about. Marcus accepted the new job because he needed to eat, because his wife Ruth needed medication, and because pride did not pay rent. But acceptance was not the same as forgetting. Every morning, as he pushed his mop past the locked records office, he remembered the kind of people who smiled while asking honest men to bend the truth. He remembered how quickly a room could turn against someone who refused to be useful to a lie. By 5:30 that morning, the first pale light had begun to press against the courthouse windows. Marcus rinsed the mop, folded the cleaning cloths, and checked the small black notebook he kept in his back pocket. It was not fancy. Its corners were soft from years of use, and its cover had been taped twice. Inside were work hours, grocery costs, medication reminders, appointment dates, and little notes written in a careful hand. Some people used phones for everything. Marcus still trusted paper, especially when paper was kept close. On the top line of that day's page, he had written Ruth's kidney appointment, Naya's birthday, and a short grocery list. Oat milk, bread, soup, apples, Ruth's prescription, blue cupcake. The cupcake mattered more than the price should have allowed. Nitya, Marcus's 12-year-old granddaughter, had asked for nothing big that year. She knew money was tight. She knew her grandmother had been tired. She knew her grandfather counted bills at the kitchen table when he thought no one was watching. So she had asked for one blue cupcake from the bakery case at the grocery store near the bus stop. The one with the bright frosting and tiny white sugar stars. Marcus had promised he would bring it home after work. That was the kind of promise a man like Marcus treated seriously. When he stepped out of the courthouse a little after 6, the town still looked half asleep. The sidewalks were wet from an overnight drizzle, and the streetlights gave the pavement a dull silver shine. Marcus pulled his hoodie tighter around his shoulders and walked toward the bus stop with the slow, careful pace of a man whose knees had carried too much for too long. He was tired, but not unhappy. There was a difference. Tired was the body asking for rest. Unhappy was the soul giving up. Marcus had not given up. At home, Ruth would still be asleep in the recliner because lying flat had become uncomfortable. Nia would be getting ready for school, pretending not to care too much about her birthday because she did not want to make anyone feel guilty. Marcus pictured the cupcake in its little plastic container, imagined placing it on the kitchen table, imagined Naya trying to hide her smile and failing. That small picture carried him through the cold morning better than coffee ever could. The grocery store was already open when he arrived. It was one of those clean, modern stores that tried to make ordinary things look expensive. The floors shone under fluorescent lights. The produce was stacked in bright pyramids. Soft music floated above the aisles, cheerful enough to make the place feel welcoming if a person did not know how quickly welcome could disappear. Marcus took a basket near the entrance and moved through the store with the careful focus of someone who knew exactly what he could spend. He chose the bread first because bread was cheaper near the back shelf. Then soup, apples, and oat milk. At the pharmacy counter, he waited quietly while a young clerk looked through the bins for Ruth's prescription. He did not complain about the wait. Marcus had spent too much of his life watching people unload their impatience onto workers who had no power over the system holding them up. When the prescription came, he checked the price, swallowed the worry it gave him, and added the receipt to his notebook. Near the bakery case, he paused longer than he meant to. The blue cupcake sat in the front row, exactly where Naya had described it, bright and almost ridiculous beneath the cold glass. For a second, Marcus felt the weight of the morning lift. It was a small thing, but small things were often where love survived when money could not do much else. He asked for one, watched it placed carefully into a little container, and paid for it separately, so it would not get crushed under the groceries. The cashier who helped him was young, with kind eyes, and the nervous energy of someone still learning how to stand up in a workplace that rewarded silence. Her name tag was there, but Marcus did not need to read it to understand her. He recognized that look, the look of a person who saw more than she said. She noticed his notebook when he tucked the receipt between the pages. She noticed that he thanked her like her work mattered. She noticed that he did not rush her, did not talk down to her. and did not treat the small transaction as beneath him. Later, that would matter. At the time, it was just another quiet kindness in a morning full of ordinary things. But from the customer service counter, Victor Rowe was watching. Victor was the assistant manager, the kind of man who had learned to make authority out of a vest and a clipped tone. He was not the owner. He was not even the store manager. But he had enough control over schedules, complaints, and shift reports to make younger employees fear him and tired customers avoid him. He liked that. It gave shape to a life that had not become as impressive as he once imagined it would. Victor had been under pressure for weeks. Inventory numbers were wrong. Premium items had gone missing. Corporate had started asking questions in careful emails that sounded polite only to people who had never been blamed for anything. Victor knew exactly why the numbers were wrong. He knew which products had been moved, which small thefts he had hidden, and which adjustments he had made to keep suspicion pointed away from himself. But pressure has a way of making dishonest people creative. He needed a story. Not a perfect story, because perfect stories invite inspection. He needed a believable one. A tired older man in worn clothes, a small basket, a separate bakery purchase, a store full of distracted shoppers, a private security lead who already believed the worst about certain people before facts arrived. To Victor, Marcus was not a customer. He was an opportunity. Marcus had no idea he had been chosen. He paid at the self-checkout for the groceries, moving slowly but carefully, scanning each item and placing it into the bagging area. The machine gave him trouble once with the apples, and he waited for assistance without irritation. The young cashier glanced over, helped clear the warning, and watched him finish the transaction. Marcus folded the receipt and placed it into his notebook with the pharmacy receipt and the bakery receipt. Then he set the cupcake on top of the bag, like something fragile enough to deserve its own space. As he turned toward the exit, Victor stepped away from the counter. The moment was almost invisible at first. A manager intercepting a customer near the front of the store was not unusual. A security lead drifting closer from the side aisle was not enough to make most people stop. Shoppers kept moving. Carts rolled. The automatic doors opened and closed with soft mechanical sighs. Everything about the scene looked normal from a distance, and that was what made it dangerous. Victor spoke with the practiced calm of a man performing concern for an audience. He suggested there had been a problem. He implied that Marcus needed to wait. He did not accuse him loudly at first. He was too careful for that. He wanted the attention to gather slowly, wanted people to see Marcus held in place before they heard why. Because once a person looks detained, the crowd begins inventing reasons. Marcus felt the change immediately. It was not fear first. It was recognition. The temperature of the room seemed to shift, not in the air, but in the way people looked at him. A woman near the cereal aisle slowed down. A man with a cart full of bottled water glanced once and then looked away. Someone whispered without knowing anything. The private security lead approached with his jaw set and his mind already made up. His name was Brent Calder, though Marcus did not know it yet. Calder had the posture of a man who believed firmness was the same as truth. He wore a plain dark security uniform, but he carried himself as if the store had given him a kingdom. He did not ask Marcus what happened. He asked Victor what the problem was, and that told Marcus everything about the direction the morning had taken. Victor produced a bag Marcus had never touched. It contained expensive items from a premium shelf, the kind of goods Marcus would not have bought even in a better month. The bag appeared from behind the counter as if it had been waiting for its cue. Victor said enough for people nearby to understand that he believed Marcus had tried to leave without paying. He kept his voice measured, but there was satisfaction underneath it. He was not discovering a crime. He was presenting one. Marcus reached for his notebook. That small movement made Calder stiffen. The security lud told him not to reach around, not to make things harder, not to act like he could talk his way out of what they had already found. Marcus stopped, not because Calder was right, but because Marcus understood how quickly a normal gesture could be rewritten by someone determined to see danger. He kept his hands visible and explained, as calmly as he could, that he had receipts for everything he bought. But calm did not help him. Calm often angers people who depend on panic to prove their version of events. Calder wanted Marcus defensive. Victor wanted him confused. The crowd wanted him simple enough to categorize quickly. But Marcus stayed measured, and that quiet steadiness made the accusation feel less secure. So Victor added details. He mentioned the high-value items. He spoke of prior losses. He hinted that the store had been watching people like Marcus for weeks, though Marcus had never been part of any such thing. The young cashier heard that and looked up. She remembered the self-checkout. She remembered helping with the apples. She remembered the folded receipt. Her face changed with the first sharp edge of understanding, but fear held her in place. Victor controlled schedules. Victor wrote evaluations. Victor knew how to punish people without making it look like punishment. She was 19, new, and not yet sure courage would protect her from consequences. Marcus saw her hesitation and did not blame her. That was one of the things people misunderstood about the quiet. They assumed silence meant weakness or approval. But Marcus knew silence had many shapes. Some silence was cowardice. Some was survival. Some was the terrible pause before a person decided what kind of witness they were willing to become. Calder stepped closer. Victor stood behind him. The store kept moving around them, but differently now. Shoppers did not stop in a circle like people in movies. Real life was colder than that. They slowed, stared, judged, and kept shopping. A mother pulled her child gently toward another aisle. An older man pretended to compare prices on canned beans while listening to every word. A teenager lifted his phone, then lowered it when Calder looked his way. The humiliation did not need a crowd gathered tightly around it. It only needed enough people to see and choose comfort over truth. Marcus asked them to check the cameras. That should have been the simplest request in the world. In a store with cameras above registers, doors, aisles, and counters, a customer asking for footage should have sounded reasonable. But lies do not like neutral witnesses. Victor's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Calder dismissed the request as if it were a trick. He said the matter was already clear enough, and Victor nodded too quickly. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed the nod. He noticed the security lead standing between him and the exit. He noticed Victor's eyes cutting once toward the freezer aisle and then away. He noticed the young cashier pressing her lips together, as if the truth were physically hurting her. Most of all, he noticed the small red light above the freezer case. It was not one of the obvious store cameras mounted in black domes from the ceiling. It was smaller, placed near a service panel, the kind installed by an outside maintenance company to monitor temperature access and after-hours service. Marcus had seen hundreds of cameras in his old job. He knew the difference between a camera controlled by a building and one maintained by a vendor. He knew that sometimes the most important witness was the one powerful people forgot existed. For the first time that morning, Victor had chosen the wrong man. Not because Marcus was rich. He was not. Not because Marcus had influence. He had very little. Not because anyone in that store was ready to protect him. Most were not. Victor had chosen the wrong man because Marcus understood records the way other people understood weather. He could feel when a story was being built against him. He knew where to look for the thing that would survive after voices finished lying. Still, knowledge did not save him from shame. Calder's voice grew harder. Victor's expression became more wounded and official, as if he were the victim of Marcus's refusal to accept guilt. The cupcake slipped from the top of the grocery bag during the confusion and landed near the wheel of a shopping cart. No one meant to crush it, or maybe no one cared enough to stop it from being crushed. The little blue frosting smeared across the clear plastic lid, and for one painful second, Marcus thought not of the accusation, not of the security guard, not of the watching shoppers, but of Nia. He had promised her. That was the detail that almost broke him. Not the embarrassment, not the way people looked at him, not even the false accusation. Marcus had survived worse things than public judgment. But the cupcake on the floor, bright blue and ruined under fluorescent light, carried a cruelty no report would ever capture. It was proof that lies do not only attack the accused, they reach outward. They touch birthdays, kitchens, sick wives, children waiting at home, and every small hope a tired person has carried through the morning. Marcus lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but to steady himself. He had learned long ago that anger, when displayed by the wrong person in the wrong room, becomes evidence for the other side. So he swallowed it. He let his breathing slow. He kept his face as calm as he could, while the people around him mistook restraint for guilt. Inside, however, he was already preserving the morning, the time, the aisle, the position of the cupcake, the order of the receipts, the camera above the freezer, the cashier's face, Victor's glance, Calder's words. A record could begin in the mind before it reached paper. By the time Marcus was finally led away from the front of the store and into the small back office, the public part of the humiliation had already done its damage. People would remember him as the man stopped near the exit. Some would tell themselves they had seen stolen goods, though they had only seen a bag Victor produced. Others would remember the security guard's confidence and mistake it for proof. A few would feel uneasy later, maybe while unloading groceries at home. But uneasiness was not the same as testimony. In the back office, Victor's performance changed. Without the shoppers nearby, his concern became impatience. Calder began writing an internal incident note before Marcus had finished explaining. That detail mattered. A fair record listens before it writes. A false one arrives with blank spaces already shaped like conclusions. Marcus asked again for the cameras to be checked. He asked for the self-checkout record, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy receipt, and the freezer camera near the service panel. Each request made Victor more uncomfortable. Calder, however, treated the details as noise. To him, certainty was easier than accuracy. He had already decided which man in the room deserved belief. Marcus was eventually released from the office, but not cleared. That was another kind of cruelty. They did not need to hold him forever to damage him. They only needed to let him leave under a cloud, with his groceries disturbed, his cupcake ruined, and his name attached to an accusation that could follow him in ways no apology could fully undo. Victor kept the premium item bag. Calder kept copies of what he claimed mattered. The receipts Marcus had placed in his notebook were no longer where they had been. That was when the morning became more than humiliation. Marcus noticed the missing receipts before he reached the bus stop. He stood under the gray morning sky with the grocery bag hanging from one hand and the ruined cupcake container in the other. His fingers moved through the notebook once, then again, slowly. The pharmacy slip was still there, tucked between 2 pages. The small list was still there. But the grocery receipt and bakery receipt were gone. For a moment, he simply stood still. A younger man might have rushed back into the store. An angrier man might have shouted. A more naive man might have assumed it was a mistake. Marcus did none of those things. He looked back at the bright entrance, at the shoppers moving in and out as if nothing important had happened there. And he understood that the story had not ended when they let him walk away. It had just become harder to prove. He took out his pen and wrote down the time. That was the first thing Marcus did. Standing beneath the bus stop shelter with the ruined cupcake in one hand and the grocery bag in the other. He wrote the hour, the weather, the number of the checkout lane, the color of the manager's vest, the position of the freezer camera, and the exact moment he realized the receipts were missing. He did not write with trembling anger. He wrote with the careful discipline of a man who had learned that memory becomes stronger when it is anchored to details. The bus came 10 minutes later. Marcus sat near the back, holding the grocery bag close to his knees. People boarded around him with their phones, lunch bags, tired faces, and ordinary morning thoughts. No one knew that the man in the faded hoodie had just been publicly accused, humiliated, and quietly robbed of the very proof that could clear him. That was another cruelty of injustice. The world did not stop for it. Traffic moved. Coffee was poured. School doors opened. People complained about weather and schedules, while someone else's life had already been pushed off balance. Marcus kept looking at the cupcake. The plastic container had cracked on one corner. The blue frosting had smeared against the lid, and the little white sugar stars were pressed into a shapeless mess. It was still technically a cupcake, but it no longer looked like something a grandfather could place proudly in front of a birthday girl. It looked like evidence of carelessness, as if he had failed at the one small thing Nia had asked from him. That thought hurt more than the accusation. When Marcus reached the apartment, the sun had risen enough to make the windows look pale. Ruth was awake in the recliner, wrapped in the old brown blanket she insisted was still good, even though the edges had begun to fray. Illness had made her movement slower, but it had not taken the sharpness from her eyes. She knew Marcus's face before he said anything. Wives who have survived hard years learn to read silence the way others read headlines. Nia was at the kitchen table with her backpack open and one shoe untied, pretending to study a worksheet while secretly watching the door. She was trying to act older than 12. Children in houses with medical bills often learn that trick early. They learn to make their hopes smaller, to ask for less, to smile quickly when adults look tired. But when she saw the damaged cupcake container in Marcus's hand, the pretending fell away. Marcus placed the groceries on the table gently. He apologized without making excuses. He told Nia that something had happened at the store, that the cupcake had been damaged, and that he would make it right. He did not tell the whole story immediately. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he could not bear to place the ugliness of that morning directly into her birthday, before she had even gone to school. But Nia saw more than he wanted her to see. She saw the way his fingers moved carefully, as if his wrist was sore. She saw the tightness around his mouth. She saw Ruth sit up straighter, suddenly alert. And she saw the black notebook on the table, open to a page filled with notes that did not look like a grocery list anymore. Ruth asked what they had done to him. Marcus could have softened it. He could have blamed confusion, policy, a misunderstanding, anything that made the world feel less intentional. But marriage had never survived between them on comfortable lies. So he told her enough. He told her that the assistant manager had accused him of taking items he never touched. He told her the security lead refused to check the receipts properly. He told her the crowd watched, and the young cashier looked as if she wanted to speak, but was afraid. He told her that the receipts were missing now, and that a service camera above the freezer might have seen what mattered. The room became very quiet. Ruth closed her eyes, not because she was surprised, but because some pain returns wearing new clothes. She had watched Marcus lose his records job years earlier for refusing to change a timestamp. She had watched people who barely knew him call him difficult, proud, stubborn, impossible. She had watched him take maintenance work with a straight back and a broken heart, because their family needed him more than his pride did. Now, years later, the same pattern had found him in a grocery store. A person with power had written a story, and Marcus had been placed inside it without permission. Nia did not cry right away. She stared at the ruined cupcake, then at her grandfather's notebook, then at his face. In that moment, something shifted in her. Childhood did not end all at once, but sometimes it lost a layer in a single morning. She began to understand that unfairness was not always loud enough for strangers to recognize. Sometimes it happened under fluorescent lights, while people kept shopping. Sometimes it wore a polite vest. Sometimes it spoke in a calm voice and counted on everyone else being too busy to care. Marcus wanted her to go to school. Nia wanted to stay home. Ruth settled the matter in the way she often did, with tenderness wrapped around steel. She told Nia that going to school did not mean forgetting, and staying home would not undo what had happened. Then she told Marcus to sit down and eat something before he started trying to carry the whole burden alone. That was Ruth. Even sick, she could still place order around pain. After Nia left, Marcus and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with the notebook between them. Marcus reconstructed everything from the moment he entered the store. Ruth wrote on a separate sheet while he spoke. She asked practical questions, the kind that forced memory to sharpen. Which register had he used? Which cashier helped with the apples? Was the bakery receipt printed separately? Where exactly had Victor stood? Which side of the freezer aisle held the small service camera? Did the security lead touch the groceries before or after the accusation became public? Did anyone else handle the notebook? Marcus answered carefully. He knew the danger of certainty when memory was still fresh and wounded. He did not exaggerate. He did not fill gaps with guesses. He marked what he knew, what he believed, and what needed proof. That distinction mattered. Lies often win by pretending confidence is the same as truth. Marcus had spent his life refusing that mistake. By mid-morning, Ruth had made one decision. They needed Grace Whitmore. Grace was not family by blood, but she had known Marcus long enough to understand what had happened to him the first time the courthouse turned on him. She was a civil rights attorney, with silver in her hair, patience in her voice, and a reputation for making institutions regret underestimating quiet people. Grace did not chase every rumor, and she did not make promises she could not keep. But when she believed a record had been manipulated, she moved quickly, because she knew evidence had a shelf life when guilty people controlled the shelves. Marcus did not want to call her at first. That was not pride exactly. It was exhaustion. He had been through the machinery before. He knew what it meant to become a case. He knew how people would examine his clothes, his job, his tone, his past, his finances, his family, and his anger. He knew they would ask why he did not act differently, why he did not speak louder, why he did not stay calmer, why he did not produce proof before the proof disappeared. Victims are often put on trial long before anyone admits a wrong has been done. But Ruth reminded him that silence had already cost him once. She did not say it cruelly. She said it as someone who had carried the same wound. The first time Marcus lost his position, they had tried to survive quietly. They had hoped that being honorable would be enough. It had not restored his title. It had not corrected the whispers. It had not taught the people who punished him to fear the truth. This time, Ruth said, they would not hand the lie a quiet room to grow in. So Marcus called Grace. He gave the facts simply. He did not dramatize the humiliation. He did not begin with outrage. He began with the missing receipts and the service camera. That told Grace everything she needed to know about the man on the other end of the phone. Many people call lawyers with feelings first. Marcus called with a chain of custody forming in his mind. Grace listened without interrupting. Then she asked for times, names, descriptions, and any proof still in his possession. When Marcus mentioned the freezer service camera, there was a pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. Grace knew the value of a camera controlled outside the place where the lie had begun. She told Marcus not to contact the store again on his own, not to post anything, not to threaten anyone, and not to let anger give them a distraction. The first move, she said, had to be preservation. Within the hour, Grace's office sent formal preservation notices to the grocery store, the outside refrigeration company, the security contractor, and the pharmacy system connected to the purchase records. The letters demanded that all footage, transaction logs, incident notes, internal communications, and registered data from that morning be retained. They were not loud letters. They did not need to be. They carried the quiet force of someone who knew exactly where evidence liked to disappear. That was the first turn in the story. At the grocery store, Victor received the notice before lunch. He read it once in the small back office. Then he read it again, slower. His face changed, not because the letter accused him directly, but because it named things he had hoped no one would think to name. The freezer camera, the external maintenance vendor, the transaction logs, the incident note, the preserved receipts, the time window. Victor had expected Marcus to complain, maybe to call the store manager, maybe even to shout into a phone and be dismissed as emotional. He had not expected preservation language. He had not expected a lawyer to move before the end of the workday. Most of all, he had not expected the camera above the freezer case to become important. That little camera had always annoyed him. It belonged to the refrigeration maintenance company, not the store's main security system. It existed because expensive freezer failures could ruin inventory overnight, and corporate did not like losing money to broken equipment. It recorded service access, temperature checks, and movement around the freezer doors. Victor had ignored it because it was not part of the camera system he usually reviewed. It was just another small device with a blinking red light, too ordinary to fear. Now he feared it. Calder did too, though he showed it differently. The private security lead did not panic. Men like Calder rarely panic in a way others can see. Instead, he became more certain, more rigid, more offended that anyone would question his handling of the incident. He told himself the matter would hold because Victor had made the initial complaint and Marcus had looked suspicious. He repeated that phrase in his head until it felt almost like evidence. Look suspicious. It was one of the most dangerous phrases in the world because it often revealed more about the person looking than the person being judged. By the end of that day, the store manager had been informed. Corporate had been informed. The outside maintenance vendor had been contacted. The incident had moved from a small back office into email threads, where careful people began choosing careful words. No one wanted to admit fault. No one wanted to accuse Victor too quickly. No one wanted to believe that a private security lead had helped bury receipts, or that an assistant manager had created a false accusation to distract from missing inventory. Institutions rarely begin by searching for truth. They begin by searching for exposure. At home, Marcus waited. Waiting was harder than writing the time, harder than calling Grace, harder even than walking out of the store with strangers' judgment still clinging to his back. Waiting gave the mind too much room. He imagined the footage being deleted. He imagined the vendor saying the camera had not recorded. He imagined Victor explaining everything away, Calder doubling down, the cashier staying silent, and the story becoming another fog of maybe and maybe not. Ruth watched him pace the small living room until his knees started bothering him. Then she told him to sit. He did, not because pacing was useless, but because Ruth had always been better at making commands sound like care. Nia came home from school quieter than usual. She had told no one about the cupcake. She had not eaten the lunch Ruth packed. She had spent the day thinking about the way her grandfather wrote things down, about the receipts missing from the notebook, about the cashier who had seen the truth and said nothing in time. Children often understand injustice in simpler language than adults. To Nia, the question was not complicated. Her grandfather had paid. Someone lied. People watched. The proof had to be found. That evening, she sat beside Marcus with the damaged cupcake container between them. He had tried to buy another one from a different bakery on the way home, but the store had only plain vanilla left, and something in him refused to pretend replacement was the same as repair. Nia surprised him by touching the cracked container gently and saying it still counted because he had tried. Marcus looked away then, because grace from a child can break a man more completely than cruelty from an adult. He promised her again that he would make it right. But even as he said it, he knew making it right would not mean only replacing a cupcake. It would mean pulling a lie into the light. It would mean forcing people who had looked away to look again. It would mean entering the machinery he had spent years avoiding and trusting that this time, the record might be stronger than the people trying to bend it. The next morning, Grace called. Her voice was controlled, but Marcus heard the energy beneath it. The maintenance company had confirmed the freezer camera existed. It had recorded continuously that morning. Better yet, the footage was stored through the vendor's cloud system, not the grocery store's local office. The store could request access, but it could not quietly erase the original. The files were being preserved. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Grace warned him that preserved did not mean won. Footage had to be reviewed. Angles could disappoint. People could claim context. Lawyers could make simple truths look complicated if they had enough time and money. But she also told him the camera covered part of the aisle near the freezer and part of the path behind the customer service counter. That was enough to matter. Maybe enough to change everything. 2 days later, Grace asked Marcus to come to her office. Ruth insisted on going with him. Naya insisted too, but Marcus hesitated. He wanted to protect her from seeing the worst parts again. Ruth gently reminded him that Naya had already seen the ruined cupcake, the trembling hands, and the silence after. Protecting children did not always mean hiding truth from them. Sometimes it meant letting them see truth handled properly. Grace's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. It smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and raincoats drying near the door. Nothing about it was flashy. The chairs did not match. The shelves were crowded. The walls held framed certificates, community awards, and photographs of people who looked as if they had once arrived there with their names damaged and left with them restored. Grace greeted Marcus with both warmth and focus. She did not pity him. Marcus appreciated that. Pity can make a person feel small, even when it is kindly meant. Grace treated him like a witness to his own life, a man whose memory mattered. She placed a folder on the table, then turned her laptop so the family could see the screen. The first clip was from the self-checkout. It showed Marcus scanning the bread, soup, apples, and oat milk. It showed the young cashier assisting him when the machine paused. It showed Marcus finishing the purchase and placing the receipt into his notebook. The angle was distant, but clear enough. Grace did not speak over it. She let the truth occupy the room without decoration. Ruth's hand found Marcus's under the table. The second clip showed the bakery counter. Marcus paid separately. The cupcake was placed in its container. The receipt was printed. Marcus tucked it away. Nia watched that part with her lips pressed tight, as if she were trying not to feel too much in front of adults. The cupcake, before it was ruined, looked bright and small and innocent. Then came the freezer camera. The footage was not beautiful. It was high, slightly wide, and colder in color than the store's main cameras. But it saw what mattered. It saw Victor near the premium shelf before Marcus ever entered that aisle. It saw him handling the bag of expensive items. It saw him place the bag behind the customer service counter, out of the normal customer path. It saw Marcus pass by later without touching those items at all. Grace paused the video there. No one said anything. Then she let it continue. The camera did not show every angle of the confrontation, but it showed enough. Victor brought the bag forward after Marcus had paid. Calder stepped in. Marcus reached toward his notebook, then stopped. The crowd shifted around them. The young cashier looked over from the self-checkout station. The cupcake fell. A shopping cart wheel caught the edge of the container and crushed it as the shopper moved past, unaware or unwilling to stop. Nia made a small sound then. Marcus reached for her hand, but his eyes stayed on the screen. The final clip showed the back hallway. It was not from the freezer camera, but from another angle Grace had obtained through the preservation demand. It showed Calder alone after the incident, holding folded slips of paper. It showed him place them into his pocket instead of attaching them to the incident materials. It did not capture his thoughts. It did not need to. Some actions are plain enough when placed beside the truth they were meant to hide. Grace closed the laptop. The office felt different after that. Not triumphant. Not yet. Truth, when finally seen, does not always bring immediate joy. Sometimes it brings grief first, because it proves the pain was real, the suspicion was manufactured, and the humiliation did not have to happen. Ruth was the first to speak, but her words were less a question than a verdict. They had known it. Now the record knew it too. Marcus sat very still. For years, people had told him in different ways that records were cold things, that paperwork had no soul. that video could not understand dignity, that timestamps were technical details. But in Grace's office, watching the lie unravel frame by frame, Marcus felt again why he had once sacrificed his position over 14 minutes. The record could not love him. It could not comfort Nia. It could not undo Ruth's worry or restore the cupcake. But it could refuse to forget. And sometimes refusing to forget is where justice begins. Grace explained the next steps. They would not simply release the most shocking clip and hope public anger did the rest. That was how stories became noise. They would build the timeline first. The self-checkout receipt, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy record, the freezer camera, the back hallway footage, the missing slips, the internal note written before Marcus's explanation was complete, the cashier's statement, if she could find the courage to give one, the prior inventory discrepancies connected to Victor. Marcus listened carefully. He was relieved, but he was not naive. He knew the other side would respond. Victor would claim confusion. Calder would claim procedure. Corporate would claim concern. Someone would say the footage lacked context, even though the whole lie had depended on denying context in the first place. Someone would say Marcus should have been more cooperative. Someone would say the security lead was only doing his job. Someone would say mistakes happen. Grace knew all of that too. That was why she looked at Marcus and told him they would not let the case become a debate about his attitude. They would make it about the record, not feelings first, not outrage first. The record first. Because once the record was clear, the feelings would know where to stand. Before they left the office, Nia asked if the video meant everyone would believe him now. It was the kind of question only a child could ask with such painful innocence. Grace did not lie to her. She said some people believe truth when they see it. Some people resist it because it costs them something. And some people only believe it when everyone else does. That was why truth needed witnesses, documents, pressure, and courage all at once. Nia nodded as if she understood more than anyone wanted her to. On the way home, Marcus looked out the bus window at the grocery store when they passed it. Through the glass, he could see shoppers moving under bright lights, pushing carts, comparing prices, choosing cereal, buying flowers, living inside the comfort of ordinary errands. The building looked the same. That bothered him for reasons he could not fully explain. A place where a lie had been built should have looked different afterward. It should have carried a mark. But buildings rarely confess. People have to make them. That night, Grace began preparing the release. Not a reckless post. Not an emotional accusation thrown into the internet. A structured statement with timestamps, preserved footage, transaction confirmation, and a clear demand for accountability. She contacted the store's corporate office again, this time with enough attached proof to make denial dangerous. She contacted the security contractor. She prepared to contact local media if they chose silence over action. Victor did not sleep much that night. Neither did Calder. But Marcus did, for the first time since the morning in the store. Not deeply, not without waking once to check the notebook on the bedside table, but enough to let his body rest. He had spent years believing the truth mattered even when nobody thanked him for protecting it. Now, at last, the truth had begun protecting him back. By sunrise, the story was no longer just his memory. It was a timeline. It was footage. It was receipts. It was a young cashier deciding whether fear would own her voice. It was a granddaughter learning that dignity sometimes needed documents beside it. and it was a quiet man in a faded hoodie, standing at the edge of a fight he never wanted, realizing that the people who tried to erase him had left their own fingerprints all over the lie. Grace did not release the evidence that afternoon. She knew better than to throw truth into the world before giving it a spine. A raw clip could be twisted. A single angle could be questioned. A few seconds could become entertainment, argument, or noise. What Marcus needed was not noise. He needed a record so complete that every excuse would have to walk past its own reflection before reaching the public. So, Grace built the timeline carefully. She placed Marcus's notebook beside the self-checkout log. She placed the bakery receipt beside the footage of the cupcake purchase. She placed the pharmacy time beside the bus schedule. She placed Victor's movement near the premium shelf beside the moment the planted bag appeared at the counter. She placed Calder's internal incident note beside the video, showing that the note had been written before Marcus's explanation had been properly recorded. Then she placed the missing receipts beside the back hallway footage, where folded slips of paper moved into the wrong hands and out of the official story. By the time she finished, the lie no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked designed. Marcus sat across from her while she reviewed it all, his hands folded around the black notebook he had carried for years. Ruth sat beside him, quiet but steady. Naya sat closer than usual, not because she was afraid of the office, but because she wanted her grandfather to feel that he wasn't standing alone anymore. On the screen, the grocery store looked ordinary. Bright lights, clean floors, carts, a bakery case, people moving through their errands. And inside all that ordinary brightness, a lie had been placed like a trap. That was what made the footage so disturbing. No one had needed darkness. No one had needed an alley, a locked room, or a dramatic threat. The harm had happened in public, under lights, beside shelves of cereal and bread, while ordinary shoppers decided the scene was none of their business. Grace understood that this was the part people would recognize. Not everyone had been falsely accused in a grocery store, but many people knew what it felt like to be judged before being heard. Many knew what it meant for a confident person with a title to be believed faster than a quiet person with proof. Before releasing anything, Grace gave the store one final chance. Her letter was direct. She told corporate that the footage, transaction records, witness information, and preserved notes confirmed Marcus had paid for his items, had not touched the premium goods, and had been falsely accused in a way that caused public humiliation and emotional harm. She demanded a public correction, an apology naming the wrong, immediate action against Victor, full disclosure from the security contractor, protection for the cashier, and compensation that recognized not only the ruined groceries, but the damage to Marcus's dignity. The response came the next morning. It was polished, careful, and empty. Corporate expressed concern. They said they were reviewing the matter. They asked for patience. They claimed they wanted to avoid rushing to judgment, even though their employees had rushed to judgment when Marcus was the one on the floor. They did not name Victor's conduct. They did not admit the receipts had been removed. They did not apologize to Marcus directly. Most of all, they asked Grace not to release anything publicly while their internal review continued. Grace read the email once, then set it down. Marcus did not need her to explain. He had heard that language before. It was the language of institutions buying time, hoping fatigue would do what denial could not. It was the same kind of smooth language that had followed him out of the records division 7 years earlier, when refusing to change a timestamp had somehow become a question about attitude and teamwork. The words were different, but the shape was familiar. This time, Marcus did not bend. He gave Grace permission to release the evidence. The statement went out that evening. It was not emotional in the way people expected. It did not beg for sympathy. It did not decorate pain. It laid out the morning with timestamps, receipts, preserved footage, and a clear explanation of what the video showed. It said Marcus had been falsely accused after paying for his groceries. It said a store manager had introduced items Marcus never handled. It said a private security lead had ignored available proof. It said receipts later disappeared from Marcus's notebook. It said the freezer service camera, forgotten by the people who built the lie, had preserved the truth. For the first hour, only a few people noticed. A local reporter shared it, then a community organizer, then a courthouse employee who remembered Marcus from the records division and wrote that he had once been punished for protecting evidence too carefully. That one sentence changed the temperature of the story. People began looking more closely. They watched the clip of Victor placing the bag. They watched Marcus paying at the self-checkout. They watched the cupcake fall and be crushed while people continued shopping. They watched the young cashier's face as she realized what was happening. And then they watched Marcus, calm, humiliated, and observant, noticing the camera no one else remembered. By midnight, the store's silence had become louder than any statement it could have issued. The next morning, news vans arrived outside the grocery store. Corporate closed the entrance for an hour and called it a security concern. Employees were told not to speak to reporters. Victor did not come to work. Calder's contractor announced that he had been placed on leave pending review. The store manager released a short message about taking the allegations seriously, but by then, the public had seen enough polished language to recognize fear wearing a suit. The cashier came forward that afternoon. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She was 19, still new enough to believe that doing a job well might protect her, and old enough to realize that workplaces often protect power before truth. She contacted Grace first because she was terrified of losing her job. Grace took her statement privately and made sure she understood what could happen. Lena said Marcus paid. She said she helped clear the self-checkout warning. She said she saw him place the receipt into his notebook. She said Victor had been unusually focused on Marcus before the accusation. She said she wanted to speak earlier, but fear had locked her throat. Marcus did not condemn her for that fear. He knew how fear worked when the person above you controlled your schedule, your hours, and your ability to pay rent. He also knew that courage delayed was not the same as courage denied. Lena had come forward before the lie could fully settle. That mattered. Her statement pushed the story further. Other employees began to talk. One remembered Victor moving premium items near the stockroom on previous shifts. Another remembered inventory reports that never seemed to match what workers saw. A third said Victor had warned employees not to question management decisions in front of customers. Piece by piece, the image of a concerned assistant manager collapsed. What appeared in its place was a man protecting himself by creating suspicion around someone else. Corporate suspended Victor officially by the end of the week. The word suspended did not satisfy Nia. She wanted stronger words. She wanted fired, exposed, punished, named. Marcus understood her anger, but he had learned that justice often moved slower than the wound. It did not mean it was not moving. Grace reminded the family that the first fall of a powerful person is rarely the final consequence. It is only the moment when distance begins. People who were once protected by institutions suddenly become liabilities to them. That was happening to Victor now. Calder tried to defend himself. Through the security contractor, he claimed he had acted based on the information provided by store management. He claimed Marcus had been uncooperative. He claimed the scene was tense. He claimed his decisions were reasonable under the circumstances. But the footage weakened every sentence. It showed Marcus calm. It showed the receipts. It showed Calder ignoring requests to verify the purchases. It showed him writing the internal note in a way that placed conclusion before investigation. The more Calder explained, the worse he looked. Grace filed the lawsuit before the public conversation could fade. The complaint named the grocery store, Victor, the private security contractor, and Calder. It described false accusation, negligent supervision, intentional emotional harm, mishandling of proof, and a pattern of conduct that allowed a low-status customer to be treated as guilty because it was convenient. But the most powerful part of the complaint wasn't legal language. It was the story of a man who had spent years protecting records from manipulation, only to be nearly destroyed by people who assumed no one would check the record. That part traveled. Church leaders repeated it. Local teachers discussed it with older students. Workers at the courthouse whispered about it in elevators. People who had once ignored Marcus while he mopped their hallway began remembering that he had been more than a maintenance worker. Some remembered him from the records division. Some remembered his quiet refusal to alter a time entry years earlier. A few remembered how quickly he had disappeared from that department afterward. Then came the envelope. It arrived at Grace's office with no return address. Inside were copies of old courthouse documents, performance reviews from before Marcus's refusal, all positive. Notes from after his refusal, suddenly critical. Internal emails discussing his lack of flexibility, a memo suggesting reassignment, and a copy of the disputed time entry request that had cost him his position without ever being called punishment. Grace studied the papers for a long time. They did not directly say the courthouse had retaliated. Documents created by careful people rarely confess so openly. But the pattern was there. Before Marcus refused to alter the record, he was reliable, precise, trusted, and professional. After he refused, he became difficult, resistant, and not a good fit. The words had been chosen to hide the truth, but the dates placed them under a light they could not escape. When Marcus saw the documents, he did not smile. Vindication is not always joyful. Sometimes, it feels like standing in front of an old wound and realizing it was exactly as deep as you remembered. For 7 years, Marcus had carried the weight of being quietly demoted, while others called it complicated. Now the paper said what his heart had known. He had not lost his place because he failed the work. He had lost it because he respected the work more than the people above him did. Nia read the documents at the kitchen table. This time, she cried openly. Not because of the grocery store, but because she understood that her grandfather's suffering had a history. The ruined cupcake had been painful. The false accusation had been cruel. But the old records showed something larger. Marcus had been paying for honesty long before she was old enough to understand the cost. The lawsuit changed after that. Grace added the old courthouse documents, not as a separate fight, but as context for who Marcus was and why the grocery store's assumption had been so wrong. He was not a man inventing a story after being embarrassed. He was a man with a documented history of protecting truth, even when truth punished him. The very quality Victor and Calder had mistaken for weakness was the thing that made Marcus dangerous to their lie. Discovery began. That was when the defendants lost control. Email showed Victor had been warned about inventory discrepancies before Marcus entered the store. Schedule notes showed he had been alone near the premium goods before the accusation. Transaction records confirmed Marcus paid. Internal messages showed corporate employees worrying less about Marcus's innocence and more about exposure. Calder's incident note had inconsistencies that grew sharper when placed beside video timestamps. The more documents Grace collected, the more the defense shifted from denial to minimization. They began calling it a mistake. Grace called it a sequence. A mistake is one wrong turn. A sequence is a path. Victor moving the goods, watching Marcus, producing the bag, ignoring the request for camera review, allowing the public accusation, and participating in the removal of receipts was not a single misunderstanding. Calder accepting Victor's version, dismissing Marcus's receipts, documenting guilt before verification, and keeping proof out of the record was not one bad moment. The harm was built step by step, and every step had a person standing on it. Victor broke first. In deposition, he tried to sound offended. He said he was protecting the store. He said inventory pressure had made everyone alert. He said Marcus had seemed suspicious because he moved slowly, kept looking around, and carried a notebook. Grace let him say all of it. Then she placed the video stills in front of him one by one. Victor near the premium shelf. Victor carrying the bag. Victor placing it behind the counter. Victor watching Marcus. Victor producing the bag after Marcus had paid. Victor looking toward the freezer aisle when Marcus asked for cameras. By the end, Victor's confidence had drained out of him. He admitted that he had handled the bag before the accusation. Then he admitted he had not seen Marcus touch those items. Then he admitted he had been under pressure over missing inventory. Each admission came smaller than the last, as if the truth had to be dragged out through his teeth. But it came. Calder lasted longer. He was the kind of man who had built his self-image around certainty, and certainty can become a locked room. He insisted he had acted reasonably. He insisted Marcus's calmness had seemed calculated. He insisted the situation required control. Grace asked him whether control mattered more than accuracy. He avoided the question. She asked whether he had checked the receipts before writing the incident note. He did not answer directly. She asked whether a person in plain clothes was easier for him to doubt than a manager in a vest. That question stayed in the room long after his lawyer objected. The case did not reach a full public trial. That disappointed some people, but Grace told Marcus that justice was not measured only by courtroom drama. After the depositions, after the documents, after the public pressure, and after the security contractor realized Calder had become impossible to defend cleanly, the defendants asked for mediation. Marcus did not want a quiet settlement that buried the truth. Grace made that clear before the first meeting began. No agreement would exist without public correction. That became the line. The final resolution came with money, but money was not the heart of it. The store issued a public statement acknowledging that Marcus had paid for his purchases, had been wrongly accused, and had been treated in a way that violated basic standards of dignity and fairness. Victor was terminated. The company referred his conduct related to inventory manipulation for further review. Calder was dismissed by the security contractor and later lost his license to work in private security after the review board found he had mishandled the incident and failed to preserve customer proof. The store agreed to retrain employees, revise accusation procedures, protect workers who came forward, and require immediate preservation of footage when a customer disputed an accusation. Grace also secured something Marcus had not expected. A correction letter was sent to the courthouse leadership, accompanied by the old documents and the public record of the grocery case. It did not force the county to rewrite history completely, but it forced them to acknowledge that Marcus's prior work and records had been professional, careful, and respected before the disputed reassignment. It also led to a small public recognition from a county oversight committee, praising the importance of evidence integrity and naming Marcus as someone who had upheld that principle. It was not everything, but it was not nothing. The ceremony was small. Marcus almost did not attend. He did not trust ceremonies easily. Too many institutions used plaques to cover the cracks they refused to repair. But Ruth told him that Nia needed to see the room say his name correctly. So he went. He wore his best jacket, the one Ruth had brushed twice that morning. Nia stood beside him with her shoulders straight. Grace stood in the back, watching like a person who had seen many victories and knew none of them arrived clean. When Marcus's name was spoken, he did not feel pride first. He felt the younger version of himself standing somewhere inside him, the man who had refused to change 14 minutes, and then walked out of the records division with his future quietly damaged. He wished that man could have known this moment would come. Not because it would undo the loss, but because it would prove the loss had not been meaningless. Afterward, Nia asked if he felt better. Marcus told her the truth in the gentlest way he could. He felt lighter, but not untouched. There are some things justice repairs, and some things it can only honor. The public apology did not erase the grocery store floor. The settlement did not uncrush the cupcake. Victor's termination did not give back the years Marcus had spent being treated like a man who had fallen because of his own attitude. But the lie had not won. That mattered. The record had held. A week later, Marcus returned to the grocery store. He went alone first. Ruth wanted to come. Nia wanted to come. Grace advised him not to push himself. But Marcus knew there was a difference between avoiding a wound and letting it own the map of your life. He needed to walk through those doors again under his own power. The store looked the same and different. The floors still shone. The lights still hummed. Customers still moved through the aisles with baskets and carts. But near the customer service counter, Victor was gone. Near the entrance, a new sign explained customer verification procedures without naming the case. Employees glanced at Marcus with recognition, some embarrassed, some respectful. Lena saw him from the self-checkout station and froze for half a second before stepping forward. She did not offer a dramatic apology in front of everyone. She did something better. She treated him carefully, normally, respectfully. She asked if he needed help finding anything. Marcus thanked her. That was all. Sometimes restoration is not a speech. Sometimes it is the ordinary courtesy that should have been there from the beginning. He walked to the bakery case. There, behind the glass, was a row of blue cupcakes with white sugar stars. Marcus looked at them for a long time. The worker behind the counter waited without rushing him. Finally, he bought one, then another. Then a small box of 4, because this time he could afford to bring enough home for everyone. He paid, took the receipt, looked at it, and placed it into his notebook. At home, Nia laughed when she saw the box. Not because the old pain was funny, but because joy had returned to a place where humiliation had once tried to settle. Ruth made tea. Grace came by later with documents for Marcus to sign, but stayed for a cupcake because Naya insisted. They did not pretend everything was simple now. Ruth still had appointments. Bills still arrived. Marcus still worked hard. The world had not transformed into fairness overnight, but something inside the family had changed. Nia no longer saw her grandfather as only a tired man who worked before sunrise. She saw him as someone who had protected truth even when truth cost him. Ruth no longer had to carry the old courthouse wound in silence. Grace no longer had to wonder whether the system that punished Marcus would ever be forced to face even a small part of what it had done. And Marcus, though still humble, no longer moved through the world quite as invisibly as before. With part of the settlement, he started a small fund. He named it the Hale Evidence Integrity Fund, though Nia teased him for choosing such a serious name. The fund helped ordinary people preserve records quickly when they were accused by employers, landlords, stores, agencies, or anyone else with more power and better paperwork. It helped pay for copies, letters, legal consultations, and emergency preservation requests. Marcus did not want fame. He wanted fewer people standing alone under fluorescent lights while someone else wrote the first lie. He began speaking at community centers. At first, he hated it. Marcus had never enjoyed being watched. But he understood that his story could teach what his silence could not. He told people to keep receipts, to write times down, to ask for cameras early, to save messages, to notice who controls the record. He told them that documentation was not distrust. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was dignity given a place to stand. Nia came with him when she could. She sat in the back with a notebook of her own, writing things down in a hand that looked more and more like his. Years later, Marcus would remember that more clearly than any news clip. Not the headlines, not the settlement, not Victor's downfall or Calder's dismissal. He would remember his granddaughter learning that truth was not just something a person felt. It was something a person protected. One evening, after a community meeting, Naya asked him whether he ever wished he had shouted that day in the store. Marcus thought about it longer than she expected. Then he told her that part of him did. Part of him wished he had made every shopper stop, every employee listen, every liar feel the force of his pain. But another part of him knew that anger alone would have been used against him. The world often demands perfect calm from the wounded and perfect trust in the powerful. That is not fair. But Marcus had learned how to survive inside that unfairness long enough for the record to speak. Nia did not like that answer. Marcus did not either. But truth is not always satisfying in the places where pain first asks for satisfaction. Sometimes the deeper victory comes later, when the lie has exhausted itself and the quiet details remain standing. Months passed. The grocery store changed in small ways. Employees received training that no one could dismiss as optional. Customer accusations required documented verification before public confrontation. Footage preservation became automatic when disputes were raised. Workers had a protected way to report pressure from management. None of it made the store perfect. No policy can. But policies are doors. And before Marcus, people like him had often been left outside them. Lena kept her job and eventually became a shift lead. She carried the memory of her fear with humility, not as punishment, but as instruction. When new employees joined, she told them that silence could feel safe in the moment. and still become a wound later. She never used Marcus's story carelessly, but the lesson shaped the way she treated people. Victor did not return. For a while, he tried to describe himself as a victim of public outrage, but the inventory findings followed him. People who build lies often expect sympathy when the lie collapses on them. Marcus did not celebrate Victor's ruin, but he did not confuse mercy with denial. Victor had chosen a scapegoat. He had chosen Marcus because he thought a tired black man in a faded hoodie would be easy to doubt. The consequence belonged to him. Calder disappeared from private security work. That, too, was justice of a kind. The authority he had used to silence a man was taken from him because he had proven he could not be trusted with it. Marcus did not need to see him suffer. He only needed to know that the next tired customer would not have to face that same cold certainty from the same man. As for Marcus, he kept working, not because he had to accept invisibility again, but because honest work had never been the shame. The shame had always belonged to those who looked at the work and decided the worker mattered less. He still rose before sunrise. He still walked through blue darkness. He still carried the black notebook. But now, when courthouse employees passed him, some greeted him by name. Some looked embarrassed. A few even thanked him. Marcus accepted the thanks without becoming dependent on it. He had learned not to build his dignity on other people, finally noticing what should have been obvious. Recognition was welcome, but it was not the source. His worth had existed on the grocery store floor. It had existed when the cupcake was crushed. It had existed when the receipts were missing, when the crowd looked away, when Victor smiled, when Calder wrote, when no apology had yet arrived. That was the lesson he wanted Naya to keep. A person is not made innocent by footage. The footage only proves what was already true. A person is not made worthy by a public apology. The apology only admits what should never have been denied. And dignity does not begin when powerful people recognize it. Dignity is already there, even when the world refuses to bow its head before it. On Naya's next birthday, there were blue cupcakes on the kitchen table again. This time, the frosting was perfect. The little white sugar stars sat untouched. Ruth lit one candle because Nia said 12 had been too many last year, and 13 felt too dramatic. Marcus laughed at that, a quiet laugh that made Ruth smile. For a moment, there were no lawyers, no footage, no statements, no old courthouse documents, no grocery store floor. There was only family, warm light, and a child blowing out a candle in a room where love had survived the attempt to shame it. After Nia made her wish, she asked Marcus if he wanted to know what it was. He told her wishes should be kept private. She said this one could be shared because it was not only for her. She had wished that people would learn to check the truth before they decided who someone was. Marcus looked at Ruth then, and Ruth looked back at him with tears in her eyes, because that was the kind of wish no child should have to make, and every adult should have already honored. Years later, people would still ask Marcus about the freezer camera. They wanted to know how he noticed it. They wanted to know whether he felt lucky. Marcus always answered carefully. Luck had played a role, maybe. But what saved him wasn't luck alone. It was a lifetime of paying attention. It was a notebook in a pocket. It was a wife who refused silence. It was a granddaughter who believed him before the world did. It was a lawyer who moved before evidence could disappear. It was a cashier who found her courage. And it was one small red light blinking above a freezer case, while everyone else assumed the truth had no witness. The world is full of people like Marcus. people who clean buildings before sunrise, people who count coins at pharmacy counters, people who keep receipts because they know how quickly suspicion can find them, people who are treated as background until someone needs a scapegoat, people who have learned to stay calm, not because they feel no anger, but because they know their anger will be used as evidence against them. And the world is also full of people standing nearby with carts and baskets, deciding whether to look away. That is where justice often begins or dies. Not only in courts, not only in statements, not only in viral clips. It begins in the small human moment, when someone sees a person being judged too quickly and decides that comfort is not more important than truth. It begins when a cashier speaks, when a shopper records, when a worker preserves a file, when a family writes down the time, when someone refuses to let the first version of a story become the only version. Marcus Hale did not set out to become a symbol. He set out to buy groceries, medicine, and one blue cupcake for a child he loved. But the people who tried to humiliate him forgot something that powerful people often forget. Quiet people are not empty. Tired people are not careless. Poor people are not proof of guilt. And a man who has spent his life protecting records knows exactly where truth likes to hide. So if you remember anything from Marcus's story, remember this. Never decide what a person is before you know what happened to them. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Never assume dignity disappears just because a crowd refuses to see it. And when the lie is loud, rushed, and confident, look for the small thing still blinking in the corner. Because sometimes justice does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a receipt, a notebook, a witness who finally speaks, and a forgotten camera that refuses to look away. 3 hours before the Saravan Cultural Council arrived to challenge Arden Museum's ownership, the museum's brightest scholars were losing a battle against a piece of clay.
We cannot let the council see uncertainty.
Then a soaked 17-year-old girl walked into the lobby, carrying a torn backpack and a volunteer application. Her name was Nadia Reyes.
Are you here for the shelter referral program?
Nadia shook her head. She had not come to ask for help. She had seen a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
No, I saw a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
But when she glanced at the digital scan of the ancient charter, her expression changed. She stepped closer to the screen.
That tablet is upside down.
The scholars turned toward Nadia in disbelief. Dr. Julian Mercer noticed her claim, not with curiosity, but with immediate contempt.
You are saying every scholar in this building has been reading it wrong?
Dr. Mercer asked where exactly she had learned to read a language trained experts had struggled with for years.
And where exactly did you learn what trained experts could not?
Nadia tightened her grip on her backpack. Then she answered that her mother had taught her everything she knew.
My mother taught me.
Then Nadia looked directly at Mercer and said the name he had hoped never to hear again, Elena Reyes.
Elena Reyes.
For the first time that morning, Dr. Julian Mercer looked afraid. The lobby became so quiet that Nadia could hear rain striking the windows. Mercer called Elena a former employee who had worked briefly as a restoration technician, trying to make Nadia's mother sound insignificant.
Your mother worked here briefly. That is all.
Nadia said the writing was not meant to be read from left to right, and that the marks along the edge were directional guides.
Those marks are not cracks. They tell you where to begin.
Nadia explained that the sentence began at the border and curved inward. Her mother had given that route a name Mercer clearly recognized.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path, Nadia said. The phrase landed heavily. Mercer's expression tightened before he could stop it. The Guardian's Path. It was not a phrase a teenager would have invented. It was not something she could have guessed from a quick glance at the screen. Elena had used those exact words in her notes. They had appeared in the report Mercer had hoped would disappear forever. The junior scholars gathered closer to the monitor. One enlarged the lower border. Another brought up older scans. A third began comparing the marks against a database of known Saravan inscriptions. Their movements became slower and more deliberate. The confidence they had shown before Nadia entered the lobby had begun to dissolve. For weeks, they had been trapped inside one interpretation. They had assumed the tablet was a sale agreement because the museum had always called it one. They had assumed the first line named an owner because every exhibition label, donor brochure, and academic summary said it did. They had not tested the possibility that the first line was being read in reverse. Evelyn Hart noticed the shift. She had been standing near the reception desk moments earlier, balancing a phone call from the board with messages from legal counsel and a growing stack of problems that no one else seemed willing to solve. Evelyn was not a historian. She did not claim to understand ancient languages. Her work was more immediate and less romantic. She managed budgets, staff conflicts, insurance concerns, donors, building permits, public relations disasters, and the 1,000 small emergencies that kept Arden Museum functioning. But she understood risk, and the silence around the research screen was beginning to sound like risk. She ended her call and stepped closer. Her eyes moved from the tablet to Nadia, then from Nadia to Mercer. She asked whether the reading direction had ever been tested using the border marks as guides. No one answered immediately. That hesitation mattered. Mercer stepped in before the silence became too revealing. He said the team had examined all reasonable possibilities. He reminded Evelyn that the document had been studied by senior experts from several institutions. He warned that a museum facing an international legal challenge could not allow an unverified theory to disrupt months of preparation. He sounded calm, but he was speaking too quickly. Nadia saw it. Owen Blake saw it too. Owen was the security guard who had opened the side entrance for Nadia less than an hour earlier. At first, he had thought she had come inside to get out of the rain. Her jacket was old, her shoes were soaked, and the backpack on her shoulder looked as though it had been repaired more times than most people repaired anything. He had almost sent her away. Now he stood near the edge of the lobby, watching the museum's most respected scholar become unsettled by a phrase from an old notebook. Owen did not know the difference between a trade agreement and a custodial covenant. He did not understand Saravan grammar or ancient border signs, but he knew how people behaved when they were trying to hide fear beneath authority. Nadia continued before Mercer could close the conversation. She explained that the opening symbols did not appear to describe a sale. The grammar was wrong for that. If the border marks were followed, the first sequence became a declaration of protection. The document seemed to describe an object placed into another party's care. It sounded less like ownership and more like responsibility. That difference changed everything. A sale would mean Arden Museum had a legal claim to the relic connected to the charter. A guardianship agreement would mean the museum had only been trusted with it. And if that trust came with conditions, the museum could lose much more than an artifact. It could lose the story it had told the world for generations. The Saravan Cultural Council had spent years arguing exactly that. Their historians believed the relic had never been sold. Their legal advisors believed the museum's claim rested on a mistranslation. Their community had watched as an object tied to their own history, ceremonies, and ancestors became a centerpiece in a foreign institution. The council was not coming to Arden Museum for a polite visit. They were coming to demand answers. Mercer knew that better than anyone. He also knew that if Nadia's interpretation was correct, the charter could become evidence against him. He tried to dismiss her without appearing cruel. He said that ancient texts were filled with ambiguity. He suggested that memories of a parent's research could become distorted over time. He described Nadia's observations as interesting, but incomplete, the kind of thing that should be left to trained professionals. To anyone who did not know him, it might have sounded reasonable, but Nadia heard the message beneath it. You do not belong in this room. You do not understand what you are touching. You should be grateful that we are even listening. For a moment, she felt the old instinct disappear. She had felt it in school when teachers saw the name of the youth shelter on her records. She had felt it at social service offices when adults spoke over her as though she were a problem waiting to be processed. She had felt it at job interviews when people looked at her carefully repaired shoes and decided not to ask another question. Her mother had once told her that poor people were often expected to be grateful just for being allowed inside a room. But Elena had also told her something else. When someone becomes uncomfortable because of a question, that question is usually worth asking. Nadia opened her backpack. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover had cracked at the corners. Several pages were held together by faded thread. The notebook had traveled with Nadia through every difficult year after her mother died. It had survived moves, shelters, temporary rooms, donated furniture, and nights when Nadia slept with it beneath her pillow because she was afraid someone might take it. To anyone else, it was only a worn book. To Nadia, it was the closest thing she had to hearing her mother's voice again. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with copied symbols, restoration sketches, arrows, questions, and notes written in Elena Reyes's neat, steady handwriting. Some of the pages showed the Serevan Charter from different angles. Others contained close studies of the border marks. One page held a rough drawing of a narrow triangular fragment, its edges covered with small symbols. Near the bottom, Elena had written 3 words. "Third fragment missing." Mercer saw the page, and this time his reaction was impossible to miss. His face did not collapse. He did not confess. He did not make the kind of mistake people made in dramatic stories when fear became too large to hide. Instead, he went still. For a man like Mercer, stillness was more revealing than panic. Owen saw it first. Evelyn saw it next. The junior scholars looked from the notebook to Mercer, unsure why a few handwritten words had changed the entire mood of the room. Nadia explained that her mother had always believed the charter was incomplete. The main tablet contained the beginning and central terms of the agreement, but not the final condition. Without that ending, the document could be interpreted in ways that benefited the people holding it. But Elena had believed a third fragment existed, and she had believed it contained the part that mattered most. Mercer dismissed the notebook as private material with no official authority. He said that scattered notes and old sketches could not be treated as evidence. Then he turned toward Owen and instructed him to escort Nadia out of the museum. The command was quiet, direct, and final. It was the kind of order Mercer had given many times before. Most people obeyed him because they knew what happened when they did not. Careers could stall, invitations could disappear, research funding could dry up. A single bad impression from the head of a department could follow a person for years. But Owen did not move. He had spent most of his working life following instructions. Security work taught people to respect procedure. You checked badges, you followed the chain of command, you kept order. You did not insert yourself into conversations that belonged to people with more education, more money, or more authority. But as Owen looked at Nadia holding her mother's notebook, he understood that this was not about procedure. It was about whether someone with less power deserved to be heard. "I think we should verify her claim first," he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed the room. Mercer turned toward him with open irritation. A security guard was not supposed to interrupt an academic dispute. He was supposed to stand near the door and remain invisible. Owen did not look away. Evelyn made the decision before Mercer could respond. She said Nadia would stay. No one would remove her from the building. No documents connected to Elena Reyes would be taken out of the museum. And no final presentation would be given to the Sareven Council until the old research records had been reviewed. Mercer tried to protest. Evelyn stopped him. She took the notebook from Nadia and studied the sketch of the triangular fragment. The shape appeared to fit along the lower edge of the Sareven Charter. Elena's handwriting was old, but the detail was precise. This was not the careless scribbling of someone guessing at a mystery. It was the work of a person who had spent long hours looking at something everyone else had ignored. Then another folded page slipped from the notebook. It fell onto the marble floor. Owen bent down and picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Most of it had been torn away, leaving only the bottom section intact. But that was enough. At the lower edge was a red administrative note. Further review suspended pending departmental authorization. Below it was a signature, Dr. Julian Mercer. Owen handed the page to Evelyn. She read it once, then again. Mercer said the report had been preliminary. He said Elena had raised questions that could not be proven at the time. He said the department had been under pressure. The evidence had been incomplete, and the suspension had been a normal professional decision. But his explanation did not answer the real question. Why had the review been suspended instead of completed? Why had the final pages gone missing? Why had the museum continued to present the charter as proof of ownership after one of its own researchers raised doubts? And why had Mercer reacted with fear when Nadia mentioned the third fragment? Evelyn looked at the old note in her hand. Then she asked Owen to take Nadia to the archive room beneath the museum. The archive was not part of the public Arden Museum. Visitors saw marble floors, bright galleries, climate-controlled display cases, and carefully chosen labels. The archive was where the less polished history lived. It sat below the galleries behind gray doors and narrow corridors. Metal shelves held old photographs, personnel files, maintenance records, restoration logs, rejected reports, and documents that had not been touched in years. It smelled of dust, paper, cardboard, and cold metal. For Nadia, it felt strangely familiar. Her mother had once worked in rooms like that. Not under gallery lights, not beside wealthy donors. In spaces where people handled broken objects, sorted fragments, and tried to restore what time had damaged. Owen switched on the lights. Rows of shelves stretched ahead of them. At first, Nadia found only small traces of Elena. Her name appeared in old staff rosters, payroll forms, inventory lists, and repair schedules. She was described as a technician, an assistant, a support employee. Never a researcher. Never a contributor. Never someone who had asked questions important enough to threaten the museum's official story. The absence hurt more than Nadia expected. It was one thing to know that her mother had been dismissed. It was another to see how completely her work had been erased. Owen searched through boxes marked with old project names. Nadia moved slowly between cabinets, checking dates and labels. The Sareven Charter had been studied in several phases over the years. The museum had recorded every restoration material, every temperature change, every crack, every photograph. Yet somehow, the final fragment had vanished from the story. Then Nadia found a photograph. It had been taken during an excavation exhibit opening 12 years earlier. Dr. Mercer stood near the center, younger but instantly recognizable, smiling beside donors, visiting scholars, and senior museum officials. Near the edge of the picture, almost cut off by the frame, stood Elena Reyes. She was holding a padded tray. On the tray were several clay fragments. One of them was narrow and triangular. Nadia placed the photograph beside the sketch from her mother's notebook. The shapes matched. The third fragment had existed. It had been found with the charter, and at some point, it had been removed from the official record. Owen searched another shelf and found a large storage box labeled Saravan Restoration Project, 2014 to 2016. Inside were folders of condition reports, photographs, correspondence, and maintenance forms. Several gaps appeared where files should have been. Empty spaces between folders suggested that someone had removed documents long ago. But at the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old storage logs, Owen found an envelope. Elena Reyes's handwriting covered the front. Nadia stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The envelope had survived 12 years in the museum's basement. It had survived staff changes, renovations, storage moves, and whatever effort had been made to erase Elena's work. Somehow, it had remained hidden among files no one thought important enough to destroy. Inside was a partial report. The first page carried Elena's name. The second page described the same border marks Nadia had identified in the lobby. The third page argued that the charter might be a custodial agreement rather than a transfer of ownership. The fourth page mentioned a detached fragment that could contain the final condition of the covenant. And at the bottom, in the same red ink, was the same instruction. Further review suspended. Nadia read the pages again and again. The words were not dramatic. Elena had not written with anger. She had written carefully, professionally, and with the restraint of someone who knew that evidence mattered more than emotion. But between the lines, Nadia could see her mother's loneliness. Elena had been right. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell people with the authority to investigate. And someone had made sure the investigation stopped. Nadia thought about the last years of her mother's life. After losing her job at Arden Museum, Elena had taken whatever work she could find. She restored damaged books for a small shop across town. She cleaned offices at night. She repaired old furniture. She translated simple letters and labels for community groups. She never returned to academic conferences. She never received another museum position. She became quieter, more tired, and more careful about what she said. But she never stopped studying. Some nights, Nadia would wake up and see light beneath the kitchen door. Her mother would be sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, copying symbols into the leather notebook. She had never spoken much about Mercer. She had never explained exactly why she had been forced out. But once, when Nadia was still young, she had asked why her mother kept working on something that had already caused so much pain. Elena had looked up from the page and said, "The truth does not stop being true, just because powerful people are tired of hearing it." Nadia had been too young to understand. Standing in the archive room with the report in her hands, she understood at last. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later. She had been trying to keep the museum from falling apart upstairs. The Saravan Council's cars had already been seen outside. Board members were gathering in the reception hall. The legal team had asked for an update. Donors were beginning to notice that the scheduled presentation had been delayed. But when Evelyn read Elena's report, the urgent noise of the building seemed to fade. She read it once as an administrator looking for liability. Then she read it again as a person trying to understand how an institution had allowed one woman's work to disappear. The report was not reckless. It was not speculative in the careless sense Mercer had claimed. Elena had documented her observations. She had included comparative references. She had outlined what needed to be tested. She had not demanded that the museum surrender the relic immediately. She had simply asked for the truth to be examined. Evelyn looked at Nadia. For the first time that day, Nadia was no longer an unwanted visitor, a shelter girl, or an inconvenience at the worst possible moment. She was the only person in the building carrying evidence everyone else had ignored. A message came through Evelyn's phone. The Sarevan Cultural Council had arrived, and somewhere inside Arden Museum, hidden beneath a false label or a forgotten display case, was the missing fragment that could expose everything Julian Mercer had spent 12 years trying to bury. The Sarevan Cultural Council entered Arden Museum without anger, spectacle, or raised voices. They did not need any of those things. Their presence alone unsettled the building. The delegation included historians, preservation specialists, legal advisors, and Professor Layla Rahman, one of the most respected scholars of ancient Sarevan language and law. They had traveled for years through archives, private collections, old shipping documents, and the scattered records of expeditions that had removed objects from their homeland. For generations, people from Sarevan had watched museums around the world display pieces of their culture. Sacred objects had been taken from temples, burial sites, family archives, and ceremonial grounds. They had been transported across oceans, assigned new catalog numbers, placed beneath foreign lighting, and described in languages their creators would never have recognized. The world often called that preservation, but preservation without consent could become another form of theft. The Sarevan Council had come to Arden Museum because the charter mattered. It was not only a tablet, it was the legal memory of an agreement made during a time of violence and uncertainty. The relic connected to it had been treated as a trophy by the museum, but to the Sarevan people, it was something else entirely. It represented continuity. It represented survival. It represented a promise made by their ancestors that no institution had the right to rewrite. Dr. Mercer greeted the delegation in the reception hall with the calm professionalism that had made him famous. His voice was smooth. His posture was controlled. He intended to lead them into the presentation room, show them the museum's official interpretation, and reassure the board that everything remained under control. But Evelyn interrupted before the briefing could begin. She informed the council that new archival material had been discovered and that the museum could not ethically present a final translation until the evidence had been reviewed. Mercer's frustration appeared only briefly. To most people, he still looked composed. But Layla Rahman noticed. She had spent decades working with scholars, collectors, politicians, and museum leaders. She knew the difference between uncertainty and concealment. She knew when a person was trying to protect truth and when a person was trying to protect a reputation. Then she saw the old leather notebook in Nadia's hands. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved to the cracked cover, then to the faint handwriting visible on the open page. For a moment, her expression changed from professional caution to something more personal. "Elena Reyes," she said quietly. I knew her name. Nadia looked up. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Years earlier, before Elena had been forced out of Arden Museum, she had contacted Professor Layla Rahman. Elena had asked questions about the structure of old Sarevan custodial agreements. She had sent a short letter describing the border marks on the charter. Layla had replied with several sources and asked for more photographs. Then the correspondence stopped. Layla had never known why. She had assumed Elena had been discouraged, She had assumed the museum had chosen a different direction. She had assumed, as people often assumed when someone disappeared quietly from an institution, that the person must have made a mistake. Now, seeing Nadia, the notebook, and the partial report, Layla understood what had really happened. Elena had been silenced. Nadia showed her the report from the archive, the old photograph, and the sketch of the triangular fragment. Layla examined them carefully. She did not rush to make a grand claim. She asked questions. She compared dates. She looked at the handwriting. She studied the directional markings drawn by Elena beside the tablet. Then she said that the evidence deserved to be taken seriously. That was enough. For the first time, Mercer was no longer controlling the conversation. Nadia remembered another detail from the notebook. The sketch of the missing fragment had been drawn beside a rough outline of the museum's upper gallery. Her mother had written a short sentence beneath it, one Nadia had never fully understood. The final promise was moved where no one would think to read it. Nadia thought of the photograph she had found in the archive. Behind Elena and Mercer, almost hidden by the group of donors, had been a familiar display case. It stood in the upper gallery beside a bronze ceremonial mask. Nadia remembered seeing it years ago when her mother had once brought her to the museum before everything changed. The clue had been there all along. The group moved toward the upper gallery. Mercer tried to stop them without seeming like he was stopping them. He argued that the museum should follow established procedure. He said the council should not be drawn into an internal archival disagreement. He suggested that the search for a missing fragment could take days, perhaps weeks, and that it would be irresponsible to make conclusions before the proper team had examined every record. But his argument only made Evelyn more certain. A man who believed the fragment did not matter would not be trying so hard to delay the search. The upper gallery was quieter than the rest of the museum. Most visitors had been redirected because of the unexpected meeting. Rain darkened the tall windows, turning the city outside into a blurred gray landscape. The bronze ceremonial mask sat behind glass at the center of the room, its surface reflecting faint gold light. Beside it was a small display case containing several fragments that had been labeled as decorative objects of uncertain origin. One of them was triangular. It was smaller than Nadia expected, smaller than the fear it had caused, smaller than the years of silence built around it. It rested on dark velvet beneath a short museum label that made it sound meaningless. Decorative clay fragment, origin uncertain. Nadia stood before the glass and felt something cold move through her chest. For 12 years, the truth had been sitting in plain sight. Visitors had walked past it. Scholars had walked past it. Donors had walked past it. Mercer had walked past it every day, knowing exactly what it was. The conservator carefully opened the case. The fragment was removed and placed beside a high-resolution image of the Saravan Charter. The shape aligned with the lower border. The clay composition looked similar. The small directional marks along one edge matched the signs Nadia had identified on the main tablet. Professor Layla leaned closer. Then she looked at Nadia. "It fits," she said. The words carried through the gallery. Mercer immediately tried to dismiss the discovery. He said that fragments could be misleading. He said that similar clay did not establish legal meaning. He said that objects from the same region could resemble each other without belonging together. But Evelyn had already requested the old catalog records. A staff member arrived with digital copies from the museum database. The history of the triangular fragment appeared on the screen. Years earlier, it had been listed as part of the Saravan Restoration Project. Then, 11 years before, its catalog number had been changed. Its link to the charter had been removed. Its classification had been rewritten. Instead of a missing section of a legal tablet, it had become a decorative fragment of uncertain origin. The authorization belonged to Dr. Julian Mercer. This time, no explanation could make the fact disappear. The fragment was taken to the research wing under the supervision of the conservator, Layla, Evelyn, and members of the Saravon Council. The charter was brought from its secure case and placed beneath specialized imaging equipment. Scholars gathered around the monitors. Lawyers stood near the doorway. Board members arrived quietly, their faces pale as they realized the museum's crisis was no longer private. Nadia stood at the edge of the room with her mother's notebook held against her chest. The same people who had ignored her in the lobby were now waiting for the evidence she had led them to reveal itself. At first, the scan showed only dark clay, scratches, and the cloudy residue of an old protective coating. The conservator adjusted the lighting frequency. The image sharpened slowly. A faint line appeared, then another. Then a sequence of symbols emerged beneath the surface, running along the narrow edge of the fragment. The room became completely still. The missing ending had been found. Professor Layla did not translate immediately. She examined the image with care. She compared the symbols to the border marks on the main charter. She followed the Guardian's path Nadia had identified. She corrected the orientation. She checked the grammar against old Saravon legal forms. It was not a miracle. It was evidence finally being allowed to speak. The charter did not describe the sacred relic as something purchased. It did not grant permanent ownership to anyone outside the Sarevan community. It described the relic as an entrusted object, placed in the care of guardians during a period of danger. Those guardians had a duty to preserve it. They had a duty to protect it. And when recognized representatives of the Saravon people came forward to request its return, the agreement required the guardians to give it back. Then Layla reached the final sentence. Her voice softened as she translated the last words. The guardian who conceals this covenant, alters its meaning, or refuses the rightful return, forfeits all claim to hold what was never theirs. The words settled over the room like a verdict. The Arden Museum had never owned the relic. It had only been trusted with it, and its right to hold it had ended the moment it chose secrecy over truth. No one spoke for several seconds. The members of the Saravon Council stood quietly before the monitor. Their faces carried emotions that did not need explanation. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted. One older historian closed his eyes, as though he had spent years waiting for the chance to hear those words spoken aloud. For them, the translation was not only a legal victory, it was proof that their ancestors had not been forgotten. The agreement had survived. The language had survived. The truth had survived, even after generations of people tried to bury it beneath labels, glass cases, and institutional certainty. Nadia looked toward Mercer. She remembered how he had looked at her when she first entered the lobby. He had seen a wet jacket, worn shoes, a torn backpack, and a girl from a shelter. He had assumed that was enough information to decide whether she mattered. He had thought he could dismiss her with polished words. He had thought Elena's name had been erased. He had thought the fragment was hidden safely behind a false label. But now the entire room was looking at him. Evelyn stepped forward with Elena's report in her hands. Dr. Mercer, you are suspended pending an independent investigation. Mercer tried to argue that the museum could not make such a decision based on a single translation. He claimed that the council was interpreting incomplete evidence. He insisted that catalog changes could have administrative explanations. He tried to make the truth sound complicated again, because complication had protected him for years. But the evidence was no longer a single translation. It was 12 years of hidden reports. It was altered catalog records. It was a missing fragment reclassified under his authorization. It was Elena's research. It was Nadia's notebook. It was the fear on his face every time someone came too close to what he had done. No one came to defend him. The scholars who had once treated him as untouchable stood in silence. The board members avoided his eyes. The legal team began collecting documents. The Saravan Council watched with the calm dignity of people who had waited too long for the truth to be acknowledged. Mercer's career did not collapse because he lacked intelligence. It collapsed because he believed intelligence gave him the right to decide which truths mattered. He had silenced Elena because she had less power than he did. He had buried her work because it threatened his reputation. He had hidden the fragment because it threatened the museum's claim. And he had dismissed Nadia because he believed a girl from a shelter could never challenge a man with titles, money, and influence. But the truth had returned through the daughter of the woman he tried to erase. The investigation that followed was larger than anyone expected. Arden Museum announced a complete independent review of the Saravan collection. The sacred relic was removed from public display and placed under joint care, while arrangements were made for its return. The museum agreed to work with the Saravan Cultural Council to review every artifact connected to the original expedition. More documents were found in the weeks that followed. There were internal emails showing that Mercer had discouraged staff from revisiting Elena's work. There were catalog revisions with no proper explanation. There were notes from meetings where concerns about ownership had been minimized because donors had invested heavily in the Saravan exhibit. Mercer had not acted alone in every decision, but he had been the person with the power to make silence look official. His suspension became permanent. His academic appointments were reviewed. His published work was questioned. The museum removed his name from several public materials while the investigation continued. The punishment was not dramatic in the way people expected from stories. There was no public shouting. No one dragged him through the lobby. No one needed to. The truth did something more lasting. It took away the authority he had used to control others. The museum issued a public correction. Elena Reyes's name was restored to the official history of the Saravan Charter. Her report was digitized, preserved, and acknowledged as the first internal research to identify the document as a custodial covenant rather than a transfer of ownership. For years, her work had existed only in a worn notebook and a hidden envelope. Now it became part of the record. A research grant was created in Elena Reyes's name for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to study history, languages, preservation, archaeology, and cultural heritage. The museum's board did not create the grant because it could erase the past. Nothing could do that. They created it because the future had to become different. Nadia did not become rich overnight. She did not suddenly appear on magazine covers or receive a perfect new life from strangers who had ignored her before. That would not have been honest. Her problems did not disappear because one day changed everything. But the day did change the direction of her life. She received a paid internship with the joint Saravan Arden Preservation Project. The position came with transportation support, educational guidance, and stable housing assistance through a youth transition program. For the first time in a long time, Nadia had a place to go that did not feel temporary. She also had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding she belonged. Professor Layla became one of her mentors. She did not treat Nadia as a miracle or a symbol. She treated her as a young person with knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the work her mother had begun. She taught Nadia how to verify evidence, how to question assumptions, and how to let facts speak louder than anger. Nadia listened carefully, but she never forgot the lesson she had already learned from Elena. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to let the truth become invisible. Months later, Nadia returned to the archive room beneath Arden Museum. The room still smelled of dust, paper, and old metal shelves, but it no longer felt like a place where forgotten stories were buried. A new workstation had been set up near the window. There were digitization tools, preservation folders, and neatly labeled boxes waiting to be cataloged. Nadia entered with her own identification badge. This time, she did not come through the side door hoping someone would let her stay. She belonged there. On her desk sat her mother's old leather notebook beside a new archival folder. The label read, Elena Reyes Collection. Nadia opened the notebook to the first page. There, in faded handwriting, was a sentence her mother had written years before. The truth is often hidden in the part everyone else ignores. For years, Nadia had thought those words were only about old symbols and forgotten documents. Now she understood that they were about people too. They were about the quiet worker no one bothered to credit. They were about the poor girl no one thought was worth listening to. They were about the community whose history had been carried away and renamed by strangers. They were about the small fragment everyone walked past because they had already decided it could not matter. The world often judges people by clothes, titles, money, addresses, and appearances. But wisdom does not always arrive wearing the shape people expect. Sometimes it comes carrying a torn backpack. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the truth that changes everything.